You always do a great job with the announcements.
Yeah.
Very good. Tell you, it's probably taken her about 9 years to get to that stage, but finally she can graduate now to Gus Usley status. Oh, them fighting words. How you all going? Hey, I reckon there must be a special reward in heaven for people who turn up to church when it's raining. I woke up this morning and thought, this is the perfect day to stay in bed, fast asleep. And then I thought, I can't. I'm the pastor. And I'm up to preach today, so I've got to come to church. Now, this morning, if we can have my keynote up there. We're taking a little detour from our current series and looking at something that's become more and more obvious as we've spent time in the lives of some of the characters out of the Old Testament. When you read through the Bible, it's not long before you start to realise that the people depicted are quite ordinary, except for the occasional highlight that happens in their lives, usually instigated by an encounter that they've had with God and not of their own doing. We use the term heroes of faith when talking about them, which can cause a bit of a confusion when we compare their moments in the spotlight with the rest of their lives. What we admire them for can often be overshadowed by their failures, and yet our Christian tradition holds them up as examples of men and women who have walked with God and received his blessing. How can we fail in life and still walk closely with God? How can you experience the blessing of God when things aren't perfect in your world? They're important questions to grapple with because they go right to the heart of the day-to-day struggle of life that all of us are familiar with. Make sense? Okay, you with me? All right. Now, the ideal that we hold in our imagination and the reality of life, of the life that we live, can oftentimes be miles apart. The further our ideal is from our reality, the greater the level of frustration, sometimes anger and dissatisfaction that we'll experience. Our ability to manage those feelings will be hugely instrumental in forming the type of life we end up living. When I was young, just a few years ago, I thought that if I did the right thing, then everything would work out well. And it was a strange belief given my upbringing, where things definitely didn't work out the way I would have wanted them to if I had more control over them. When I was in Bible college, I'd often think that I'd dream about the future and all the things that I wanted to be doing for God, and I thought that if I prayed hard enough, then I could have whatever I wanted. Little did I know what that entailed. See, I came through at a time where Yonggi Cho was the flavour of the month. Now, if some of you may not know who Yonggi Cho was, he's passed away now, but Yonggi Cho grew the largest church in the history of the planet, over 700,000 members. Can you imagine the serving teams that they would have had to organise to get that thing working? Over 700,000, and what he used to say was, I'm just a little Asian man who prays. And so I heard that when I was a young guy, and I thought, that's all I've got to do. I've just got to pray really hard, and everything will work out perfectly. Over the years, I've seen and experienced more low points in my life than high points. And you might be thinking right about now that I must have done something wrong if that's been my experience. And you'd be right and wrong. You see, life isn't a Rubik's Cube to be solved or a lottery to be won. Life is messy at best and downright tragic at worst. Now, we love to use the analogy of mountains and valleys when talking about life, but have you ever stopped to think it through? Have you ever stopped to think that analogy through? The reality of that analogy is that most of your life is lived below the peak. And that's not a bad thing. because peaks very rarely change us. It's how we manage the journey that brings the most growth and transformation in our lives always. Social media has propagated the myth that your life can be perfect if you work hard enough, if you network better, if you dress your kids in the latest fashion, if you stay on top of your eating, exercise and sleep. But scratch a little bit deeper and you soon realise that the majority of people go through ups, lots of ups and downs in their lives, and that's not a reflection on their value or worth as a person, but rather a reflection on what life is truly like for all of us. Life is messy, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't prevent it. You can only live with it. In John 16:33, Jesus said, "In this godless world you will continue to experience difficulties, but take heart, I've conquered the world." The New Living Translation puts it, "I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world." All up in various translations we have the words difficulties, trials, sorrow, tribulation, distress, suffering, affliction, troubles and persecution when translating Jesus' words about what we can expect in life. And none of that has anything to do with you. That's just par for the course when you live on planet Earth. Now, if God has forewarned us that stuff will happen, why do we think He's deserted us when stuff happens? Why do we think it means that we're unworthy and of less value than those we perceive as having it better than us? Because neither of those conclusions make any sense. But what about the stuff-ups that we cause? Now, if you think you're perfect, you can zone out at this part of my message. But for the rest of us who are well aware of our own failings, the Old Testament is incredibly encouraging because we see that flawed human beings who consistently follow after God throughout their lives do all right in the end every single time. There's no exception. So it's obviously not perfection that God is looking for, but rather a heart that continues to turn back to Him over and over again, full stop, end of story. And it really is that simple. However, putting it into practice will be the greatest achievement of your life because everything else you accomplish in life hangs on your ability to follow that decision through. So, is there a way to... Did that come up already?
Yeah, only just.
So, I'm going to blame Liam.
It's you.
I'm paranoid. Liam, we were talking about my slideshow from a few weeks ago. Liam was the poor person up. It was you, wasn't Liam? You were the poor man up the back there for that week. Anyway, so is there any way to manage, mitigate, prevent our tendency to allow bad things that happen to us and through us, not just to us, but through us, to influence our heart and subsequent behaviour? In 1972, a researcher in a small city at the bottom of New Zealand, Dunedin, set out to track the development of more than 1,000 newborn babies and their health and behaviour at age 3, not really realising that over the next 50 years the research would morph into one of the world's most important longitudinal studies. The study didn't stop at 3 years, instead it gathered pace, following the lives of the participants from birth into adulthood and creating a comprehensive body of data that has yielded more than 1,300 peer-reviewed research papers, reports and books. Now, there have been all sorts of outcomes from that study, but the one that I find most fascinating was when the researchers asked the question, what traits did all of the children who went on to achieve a decent level of success in their latter life demonstrate from a very young age? And they narrowed it down to one specific trait. Can you guess what it was? I didn't actually want you to try and guess. I wanted Brett and Tam. No, actually, I did want you to try to guess. This is what they came up with. This is the one trait that determined whether a child would have success later in life. Emotional regulation. Being able to choose and control emotional responses, particularly to negative situations, without engaging in self-destructive behaviours. An internal trait that shows itself through stamina, perseverance, and the choices that the person makes. Another more common term for emotional regulation is self-control. The measure of self-control a child possesses has, through the findings of the Dunedin study and others, been shown to be a more important factor in predicting individual positive life outcomes than intelligence or IQ. You're lucky, Brett. You've got lots of self-control. Not much IQ. He's back. I can pick on him. Finally, I can pick on someone. Or should I pick on Molly?
No.
Molly's about a foot taller than she was when she went away. I was looking up to her when she came through the door. The results of the Dunedin study show that in almost every measure of success, self-control makes a huge difference. Moreover, participants who displayed low levels of self-control during childhood presented with a raft of physical problems later on in life. These health issues included such things as obesity, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart disease, gum disease, and sexually transmitted diseases. Low self-control children, which is the term they used, were also more likely to grow up addicted to tobacco, alcohol, or drugs. All these represent an expensive cost to the individual, their community, and society. Sounds pretty doom and gloom at the moment, but the great news was that low self-control children, that's the term they used, could be taught self-control. In fact, the children who were placed in situations where they were required to exercise self-control were able to grow in it and turn around the natural trajectory of their lives. And they have 50 years of real-life experience and research to back that up. So why do I bring all of that up? Probably starting to join the dots at the moment. The people in the Bible who were able to consistently move forward with God through the ups and downs of their life experience are the ones who received God's blessing and left a legacy for their children. In spite of their many failures, they still managed to land in a place that has spoken to us down through the corridors of history in a largely positive way. Now, I find that hugely encouraging, personally. You'll discover over and over again throughout the Bible, God encouraging his people to persevere in spite of how they're feeling or the things that are going on around them. Keep on doing good, because in due season you'll reap a harvest. Count it all joy when you face diverse trials and tribulations, because don't you know that this is producing endurance, perseverance in your life, and perseverance must continue to the end. Why? So that you're complete, lacking in nothing. When I was in the middle of an extremely tough time personally in my role as pastor of a church, I remember sitting at my desk over in Melbourne Street in the city one morning wanting to quit and realising that on paper things weren't as bad as I was feeling, and that it was the emotional state of my heart which was my greatest challenge at the time. And I realised that if I could maintain my emotional equilibrium and not allow how I was feeling to spill over into my actions, then I would be okay. That realisation did absolutely nothing to make me feel better. You're probably thinking, that realisation was the point where my life changed and it went. That realisation, that logical conclusion that I came to, did absolutely nothing to make me feel better. I could talk to myself, I could pray, I could worship, I could hang out with great people, and I still felt the same way on the inside. But what I did manage to do was to keep on doing the right things long enough so that when my emotions finally came good years later, I was where I was meant to be. still walking with God, still loving people, still married, still fathering my kids, still pastoring our church. What does God require of us when we're struggling? When life is a mess? When our kids have taken a U-turn in their faith? When your workplace is facing hard economic times that are going to impact your future financial security? When you discover you or someone close to you has a serious health issue? When there's a breakdown in an important relationship? What does God want you to do? He wants you to keep coming back to Him. To keep putting one foot in front of the other and not allow the voice of ego to drown out the voice of His Spirit. You see, ego isn't just me thinking I'm better than everyone else. It's also me thinking I'm worse. Your ego is the identity that you've created of yourself. It's how you see you. And then you live out of that identity. You want to have a humble ego. Anything else will get in your way. A prideful ego or a self-loathing ego will create a barrier between you and God's grace in your life. Coming, because both of them keep you away, keep you separated from God. Coming to God in humility, realizing that you need Him, regardless of where you find yourself, deals with both extremes. All of the people that we've been looking at throughout our series, so far from the first 5 books of the Bible, struggled in their personal lives. None of them started out from a place of power or privilege. They all had major issues that they had to manage and live through, sometimes for their entire life. What was their redeeming quality? They took God at His word and continued to believe that He cared for them. The hope of their story that we can take home with us today is that if we don't give up on Him, then our future well-being is set in stone. If God is real and we have eternity with Him ahead of us, then this short time we have here on earth is like playing in the sandpit before you're old enough to go to school. Just learn to treat each other kindly and don't wander off with strangers. And you'll be fine. Forget them.